Vale. ¿Estamos listos? Bienvenidos y gracias por asistir. Esta sesión es totalmente en castellano. Ja, bromeando. Kidding. Anyway, yeah, occasionally I do give a talk in Spanish, but this time, no, we're all in on English, right? Sure, why not? So welcome to this afternoon, I guess now, this afternoon session on Spring Security for Noobs. And by the way, that's not derogatory. We're all noobs at far more things than we're expert, right? So this is kind of meant to be an introductory session, kind of in general, at a very quick pass-through for security in general, and then diving right into Spring Security and application security specifically. I actually do want to get a photo before I get started because I so often forget to do this. So I need to prove to my boss that I was actually here doing something versus just sampling the coffee scene here in Barcelona, which, by the way, is quite excellent, but we won't tell him that. Okay, so let's see if I can, let's do two sides here. So everybody say spring. Spring. That was terrible. That was really terrible. Okay, let's see if the other side is any more away. All right, so on this side now, say spring. All right, well, that'll have to do. With my photography skills, maybe one of those turned out anyway, so, you know. So if you need to reach me, if you have questions, comments, or feedback, I have a lot of material that I want to go through, and I don't want to rush it, but I do want to be pretty methodical about moving forward so that we can get through all of this and hopefully have a bit of time for Q&A at the end. If not, the best way to reach me is on Twitter. I live on Twitter from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed and sometimes in between. So if you're not following me on Twitter, why? First, why? But secondly, if you would, just follow me at mkheck. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, please do reach out to me via Twitter, preferably. If you have questions, comments, or feedback and you don't want to share them with the whole world, my direct messages are open. So just DM me. That's perfectly fine. If you don't like Twitter, if you're not on Twitter, which, by the way, you should be on Twitter, but if you're not there, I'm also a member of the slightly older and more established social network called Email. Is anyone on Email? Okay. Well, I am still on email. I'm not quite as diligent about responding to email. I do check it from time to time, though, so please do reach out there as well. The two email addresses that I check the least infrequently are mark@thehecklers.com and mheckler@pivotal.io. So, for what it's worth. So who am I, and what makes me sort of, pseudo, almost partially qualified to talk about this? I have authored several blogs and blog posts. I've co-authored a couple of books. I've contributed content and code to several other books, some of which actually even recognize my contributions, which was nice. The rest of them, well, I wasn't planning on living on the royalties anyway, so it's not a big deal, I guess. I am a frequent event speaker, third or fourth time here at Spring I/O. I think it's fourth now, which is awesome. Any first timers? Yeah, I hope you'll come back, and I hope they'll let me come back too. It's just a great event, and just gets better every year. I am a Java champion and a Java 1 Rockstar and a few other, meaningless awards. I'm sorry, they're not meaningless, but anyway, I tend and have contributed to the Java community for a long time. Plan to continue doing so. So if you had anything to do with the recognitions, I appreciate it. Thanks for the vote of confidence. I am a professional problem solver. That's not my official title. It's just what I do, as do you, right? This is our life. But I am a Spring developer and advocate with Pivotal, so that's the official part. So some takeaways for today, and I guess I'm going to have to manually do that. So tough. First, I want to at least give a bit of contextual background in terms of an outside-in security profile, kind of what we're talking about, and again, set that context for the rest of the exploration here. We're going to talk a bit about system versus application level security and what that entails, distinctions and differences. Then we'll talk a bit about authentication and authorization, or as I like to say, who's who in the zoo, and who does what to whom with what, and when. And that's kind of important, right? We hear terms thrown around an awful lot, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. Sometimes I slip up and use them interchangeably. So I'll try my best to make that distinction that, again, kind of helps with clarity, I think. OpenID Connect. And OAuth 2, what do they do and what's the value? We hear a lot about OAuth 2, not so much about OpenID Connect, but obviously it's in there, and I'll explain kind of the distinction with that as well and how they came into being. And we'll code. And I tend to narrate while I code, so I'll provide some of the background and then we'll launch in and I'll continue to kind of guide through as we write code because, again, that's how I internalize things best. I think that makes sense, right? We're used to dealing with code, so it kind of helps to see how it applies directly to our to what we're creating. So first, the outside-in security, or as I like to say, sort of. This was a diagram that was created probably 2,000 years ago, I think. It's not been quite that long, but it feels like it. It's still being propagated by the CISSP. And I guess it has some merit. I think conceptually it's not a bad thing to kind of look at things this way, but in the age of cloud, things have changed. They've shuffled quite a bit, and in some ways inverted. And in some ways, certain things that we viewed perhaps as sacrosanct in years past, they're not necessarily that applicable anymore, at least not at a very extensive level. So in the old days, when we had physical facilities and physical data centers and server rooms and clusters and racks of servers, and I mean, obviously there are servers somewhere, but many times we don't deal with those, right? But in the old days, when we had all of that and we managed them physically, we typically in an organization dealt with things at a policies, procedure, and awareness level. So we crafted these beautiful mounds of documentation and policies that we applied toward everything in terms of a security profile. This kind of enveloped our physical security, who had access to perhaps our installation and our specific building and our server rooms and things like that. We carefully controlled our network stack, how we dealt with ingress and egress in terms of data coming in and out of our applications, our systems at a general level. We secured our servers, so we had our server stack that we dealt with physically and configurationally, is that a word? But we typically looked at things and drilled into that level next. On our servers, of course, we're hosted our applications, and our applications kind of envelop the data that our applications use, right? It makes for a great picture. Again, this is a bit different in today's day and age because in many cases, perhaps, for instance, we'll have a data service that we're connecting to via URI, and that is nowhere near where our applications are being hosted. We may not even know or care where the instances of our application at this point in time are running. So I think it's good in terms of a generic mental construct, but it certainly doesn't hold much water in terms of a physical construct anymore. Again, I think it's useful mentally if you update it to this century. It is, after all, 2019 now. So anyway, so a few general thoughts on system security. I'm going to hit these very quickly because, again, you could do entire talks on any one or a couple of these, and we don't have that much time, sadly. But I do think it's important to at least throw that out there. Many of you already have these in place. Many of you don't. I still jokingly say it's 2019, but these things take time, right? Especially in large organizations. But you should have some kind of password and access hygiene. You should have some method of controlling access, controlling who can access your systems and to what extent and what ways. Two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication is very important, right? If you have multiple factors, it's not just based on what you know. You can't just somehow compromise a person's password and you have access to everything. You should have sane authorization. So many times we have dealt with in the past the principle of least privilege, which is a good thing in concept, again, once again in concept. But if you have a 5-minute change that takes 5 weeks to get approvals and authorizations to deploy, perhaps that's not keeping you competitive, right? So I always tend to kind of go toward the sane authorizations. You don't want to throw open the doors and give everyone everything, but you should have a way of giving enough privileges and enough permissions to where real work can get done in an expedient fashion. Logging and auditing is very important because when things happen, as invariably things do, you need to be able to quickly identify, trace the root cause, and fix, right? So it's very important that we have good monitoring and logging throughout our systems, entire systems. Wire encryption is very important. In the old days, we typically looked at things like HTTPS as being high overhead, right? They incurred a big cost. We didn't want to do that. My goodness, that would be a huge performance hit. Turns out it's not so much. There are a couple reasons you want wire encryption. One is for the cosmetic reason, in that if you serve applications up via a web page and you do it perhaps through Chrome, Google Chrome will identify things that aren't served up via HTTPS as insecure. You don't necessarily want your users to be freaked out all the time with, this app is insecure, this site is insecure. So that's cosmetic more than anything, but it's also an actual practical matter. Coming back to the performance hit, CPU-wise, it's about a 1% performance hit. Google converted everything to HTTPS and found 1%. In terms of network performance hit, it was about 2%. So this is negligible stuff to have encrypted communication via the wire. So this just frankly should be done across the board. You should store your secrets securely. This is very important. You know, so many times we don't necessarily guard our secrets well. But with things like HashiCorp Console, for instance, this is so easy to do anymore that it seems, again, rather pointless and silly not to. You should also encrypt your data at rest. It does no good to secure the communications pipeline if all of your jewels, your crown jewels, are out there exposed, because if someone gains access to your network, whether that's a disgruntled employee, which, by the way, that's a huge one in terms of security compromises, that's the top of the pile, or if someone does actually gain unauthorized access to your network, you don't want to leave that data sitting all out there unencrypted for easy harvest, right? So, again, these are all things that could be their own talk by themselves. We don't have time for that. So another time, another talk, and we'll just go from there. Drilling in a little bit more at this point to application security, or much more at this point. Let's talk Spring Security. Spring Security is an open source framework. You can use it with any Java or, well, JVM-based application. Typically, you see it used in conjunction with Spring Framework applications, and Spring Boot actually brings some nice auto configuration to the mix as well. So that's kind of the home, but it certainly doesn't require that. But Spring Security brings a lot to the table. And there's a lot to it, right? Anything that you have that is meant to guard against a bunch of different attack vectors and bad eventualities necessarily has some complexity. I like to take it up to a higher level because at a higher level, I think it's pretty simple. And even that, I've streamlined things, but these are, in my mind, the first among equals, the top three things that you should kind of understand to grok how Spring Security generally works. Starting with Spring Security 5, we now have an HTTP firewall. Many times, malformed URIs are responsible for a lot of compromises, right? So if you can filter out those malformed URIs, you've gone a long way to making your application secure. The HTTP firewall checks for any malformed URIs, discards those requests, and life goes merrily along. And it's secure by default, so it's at the highest security level, the highest level of rigor, and you can back that off. You can tweak it. Certainly you have adjustments that can be made. But again, and this is one thing I want to keep mentioning, I probably will keep mentioning, is it's the most secure by default, right? We're not Mongo. Any Mongo folks out there? I say that, and I'll occasionally kind of like poke fun at friends, but the fact of the matter is the worst offenses with Mongo are us, right? We all want something easy to use with minimal configuration, and then when somebody gives that to us and we don't take the time to configure it and something bad happens, we point the finger elsewhere. And much of the problem with Mongo is that, frankly, none of us bothered to secure it. So that's not a good thing, right? We took the opposite approach. And Spring Framework, Spring Security, all of the various Spring portfolio of components and products are opinionated. And the opinion of Spring Framework is you should start off from a position of the highest level of security and back that off and adjust that where needed. So the HTTP firewall is locked down pretty tightly, or as tightly as possible, from the get-go. The next part to be aware of is the security filter chain. And this is kind of the secret sauce, in my opinion, right? Because once a request passes the HTTP firewall, it goes through a series of filters. And you establish these filters and provide criteria that if a particular filter is met, then the request pops out of the filter chain and is processed accordingly, right? So as soon as it makes a match, then it's processed. If it goes all the way through the chain and doesn't match, what happens? It's discarded. So again, that other level of security comes into being. And then you have request headers. The internet, and by the way, I'll get into the security filter chain a bit more here momentarily, and then of course we'll see it in action as well. The Internet Engineering Task Force dictates certain things that can be included in request headers. And these are areas that can be used to button down, again, security, to make sure that, again, from that position of security or strength, that you can eliminate a lot of potential attack vectors. And I'll cover that as we get into it a little bit more and show some of the different headers that are on by default or can be tweaked in Spring Security as well. So again, there's more, but these are, I think, again, the first among peers and certainly the most important to kind of dive in and get started. Before I forget, as I likely will, there is a workshop this afternoon on Spring Security and OpenID Connect. So if you hadn't made plans to take that in, I would encourage you to do so as kind of a continuation of this talk. And then Joe Granja, who is one of our security ninjas on our Spring Security team, is giving a talk tomorrow, which goes much more in depth. I would strongly encourage you to sit in on that because this will take you up to a point, but Joe will take you much, much farther than that. So please do make plans to attend that tomorrow as well. So, the request filtering. And again, this is somewhat simplified as well, but it's pretty straightforward, right? A filter chain proxy comprises multiple, well, potentially multiple security filter chains. Typically, you'll have one, but you do have the possibility of having multiples. But in most cases, what you basically have is a series of filters that are passed, that are request passes through until, again, it makes that match or not. And then something happens, right? Again, simple concept, very neat and elegant execution. So let's code. And I'm getting hot. So I feel like I'm in that hot seat already, but I promise that's as far as I'll strip, okay? So this is a family-friendly session. Okay, so let's, and by the way, I always try to dress appropriately for a session, so I wore my Getting Started with Spring Security shirt here. I think that's good advice. If you're not a Douglas Adams fan, again, why? Go read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, please. You'll appreciate it. Okay, so let's get started. Does everyone recognize this site? This has changed of late. If you haven't been here in a while, this may look a bit different to you, but that's good, right? Change is good. If anyone is sitting out there saying, who moved my cheese, and is wondering what happened to the old Spring Initializer, this is a new improved version. If there's something that you find missing or that you wish were there, again, we're taking feedback, so please do give us that feedback. But in general, it's just a nice, neat, clean interface now. So very cool. I'm going to stay down the middle. Let's see how I'm doing on time. This is good, so we should be okay. I'm going to stay down the middle here, but you have options to create Spring and Spring Boot-based microservices here. I'm going to stay with Maven and Java, but again, if it makes you happy to do Gradle and Kotlin, which I frequently do as well, that's fine too, or Groovy, what have you. I'm going to stay with the current version of Spring Boot, which is now 2.1.5 as of yesterday. Woot! Wow, that doesn't seem... Okay. I know I'm a little geeky, but I mean, this is good stuff, folks. All right, so 2.1.5, I'm going to change this to the Hecklers because I can. And I'm going to step through a couple different scenarios here because I think it helps build that foundation, that basic security foundation. I'm going to start with form-based authentication or user ID password, right? And that is, in many cases, what many applications use. That's enough, right? That's sufficient. So I'm going to call this SSEC for Spring Security form. And I'm just going to bring in a few dependencies that I'm going to use. I'm going to stay with the basic imperative Spring MVC type of application. Certainly there's a reactive capability as well, but I'm going to keep it as plain vanilla as I can so I can focus specifically on the stuff I want to focus on. And then I'm going to bring in the dependency for Spring Security. That's it. So we'll get started there. And we'll save that down. And then I'm just going to go to my desktop and we'll unzip that. And we'll open that in my favorite IDE, NetBeans. I'm kidding again, yes. NetBeans is awesome. Again, I pick on my friends. If any NetBeans users are out there, I love NetBeans. It's a great IDE, works well with Spring Boot applications. Eclipse as well. Eclipse is Eclipse is an IDE. I'm kidding. I mean, we have Spring Tool Suite built on Eclipse, actually, or built with Eclipse in conjunction with, which actually has some great cloud deployment capabilities. Every time a friend of mine shows me that, it looks so good. But IntelliJ fits my workflow really well, so I tend to kind of stay with that. I'm actually going to take this into presentation mode, which does some funny things when I have multiple projects loaded, but it just looks really nice and clean here. So let's just start off. Yeah, so there we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is just create a REST controller, and we'll call this class our form controller. And we're just going to keep it pretty simple, again, right off the bat. So I'm going to do a get mapping for /everyone, because I want to have everyone be able to access a particular page. And I'm just going to, again, keep this simple. So we'll just say for get everyone, return hello, everyone. Everyone. OK, super simple here. I also want to create an admin capability or an admin page. So I'm just going to do a get mapping /admin string admin only and return. And let's see, we'll just do a h1 administrator page /h1 greetings admin. OK. OK, so again, really simple stuff. Let's go ahead and rerun this, or run this, I guess, for the first time out. And I'm going to switch now to a terminal. I use HTTPy instead of curl because it's, as they call it, curl for humans. I like it because it formats my stuff really nicely. So if I do a colon, and again, you can leave off certain things, which for a lazy coder like me, that's a wonderful thing. It assumes localhost if you don't provide it, so we'll just do this. And actually, let's see, I said everyone, so everyone. And this is exactly what should happen, right? Because we have Spring Security dependency on our class path, and it's saying, hey, look, you said you wanted this secured. I'm going to go with the default most secure position I can based upon the information you've given me, which isn't much, admittedly, at this point. But it's going to lock down my endpoints. And this gives me a chance to show you a couple of things, some of these headers I was talking about. So one of the things by default that Spring Security does is set things to no sniff, right? We want that no sniff in the request header because that means that your browser or your user agent will not sniff the content and say, smells like a JPEG. Let me go ahead and render that for you. Because what happens then is you might have a script or something nefarious embedded in that JPEG, right? You don't want that to happen. So again, from that position of security, we start off with no sniff. We also have X-frame options set to deny. And what that does is ensure that you don't have frames support in your browser in particular. So an invisible or a transparent frame can't be sitting on top of a button or a link so that when you click on it, it does something other than what you would expect it to do, because that invisible frame is there to capture that click. That's what's known as clickjacking. So hijacking that click. You don't want that. So you tend to set this to deny, or Spring Security does that for you on your behalf. You also have cross-site scripting protection by default turned on. So again, these are things that you get free out of the box. If you're using a content delivery network, you may need to tweak that, particularly that last one, these cross-site scripting. But again, based upon what limited information we've given Spring Security at this point, it's configured very nice and secure. It's also telling us right off the bat that we, so we're unauthorized. I'm look at that for a second. We're unauthorized. We've tried to hit an endpoint that we don't have access to at this point. Or wait, shouldn't we, right? Well, the thing is, again, based upon the limited information we gave Spring Security when this application started, it said, look, I'll create a user account and I'll generate a security password. We didn't provide that, therefore we're trying to hit that, and we're unauthorized. So let me go back here now and do a --auth, right, with user and this terribly long generated password, and then I'll try again. So everyone, and now all of a sudden we see this. We've got hello everyone. So we are getting there, right? Now, what happens if we try to hit that instead of the /everyone /admin? Well, here's the bad news, right? We haven't provided any way to determine authorization for various different endpoints. So right now we have access to everything if we have access to anything. So let's go and we'll address that next. So let's see. The first thing I want to do is configure my security profile just a bit. So I'm going to enable web security, and we'll create a class called security config. Yeah, I'm typoing. I type fast, and sometimes I typo fast as well. So, and I'm going to extend our web security configure adapter, which again is how we override that basic defined or predefined security that Spring Security and Spring Boot bakes in automatically for us via autoconfig. So the first thing I'm going to do is override my configure method here. And this allows me to, let's see, let me bring that down just a little bit so I have a little more room here. This allows me to configure my authorization. I'll come back to that in a moment. But what I want to do first is authenticate. Now again, I guess I need to come back to briefly touch this. Authentication versus authorization. They sound just close enough alike that, again, it's easy to get your tongue tangled and say the wrong one. But authentication, see, I did it already. Authentication is defining that you are who you say you are. So what's your name, sir? Michael? Marcos. Oh, excellent. Likewise, mucho gusto. Okay, so Marcos, can you prove you are you? Well, hopefully you can. You can prove that you are who you say you are so you can access this application. That's authentication. Now, do you have access to a particular endpoint? That's authorization. Are you authorized to access this resource, right? So we're going to start off and create a bean, right? And I need a user details service. I need to create one. So we'll just call this authentication, this method. And I'm going to create a couple of users here. So user, let's see, user details, Marcos, see? Okay, perfecto. User.builder, and I'm going to, let's see, I'll do a username, Marcos, and password. Well, I'm going to have to use you as the bad example, so, you know, yeah, usually that's me, which is kind of appropriate because I'm a Mark too. So, so we'll just start off with password, and let's see, we'll do a, let's see, roles and user. We'll keep it at user because right now we're taking this slowly, and we'll build that user. Now I need another user here, and what's your name, ma'am? Lori? L-A-U-R-I-E? Okay, all right, so we can do that. Lori, pleasure to meet you. Let's see, user.builder and username, Lori, password, and we'll say Lori's password hygiene is a bit better than yours. I mean, you need to level up, but this is a good start, right? Okay, so this will be a strong password. It's just a demo, okay? I could create a really nice tough one, but then I have to retype that each time, and that's just terrible. It slows me down, and we want to make sure we get through this, right? So let's see, I want Lori to be a user and also an admin, right? So let's see, oops. There we go, .build, and there we go. So now, what I'm going to do at this point is I just want to show what we have here. So let's see, Marcos, password, and then we'll do a plus Marcos.get password. There we go. And then I'm just going to duplicate that so we can get Lori's password here and just show it so we can see what we're dealing with. Lori's password. Okay. And then I want to return new. I'm going to create an in-memory user details manager, which is a type of user detail service. Whether you're backing to something like Spring Data JDBC or LDAP or what have you, these are all similar constructs. They work similarly. I'm just going to keep it simple here now, again, for the purposes of our demo, and we're off and running there. So we have our authentication, almost. And I want to do something here just so I can show you that we're not quite there yet. I'm going to go ahead and restart this. I mean, it looks pretty good at this point, right? So let's see what happens when we try to log in. I'm actually going to go to a page here. So let's see, localhost 8080. Now this is nice because out of the box, Spring Security will give you a login and logout page, just pre-configured. You can obviously create your own, but you need some mechanism for doing this, and if you fail to provide this, it's provided for you. So let's see, Marcos and password. Now, we're getting a problem here. So let's go back and take a look. And let me scroll back through this, and it will tell us pretty nicely, pretty clearly what the problem is right out of the gate. we have a bit of an issue. Actually, it's right here. There's no password encoder mapped. And if we go back up here and look, let's see if I can scroll back up. I got things nice and big for visibility, but it makes things a little harder to find. So let's see. Yeah, here we go. So if we see our passwords here, they look suspiciously like clear text. That's because they're clear text. That's a problem, right? We don't want that. One, because we don't store things in clear text. Two, because we need to assume that there will be some kind of an encoder and decoder that is used to match this, which we haven't specified yet. This is a bit of a problem. So let's go ahead and create an encoder. Let's see. So private final password encoder. We'll call this PW encoder equals password encoder factories.create delegating password encoder. Now what this does, this little bit of code here, is very nice because this is a bit of future proofing that we have. So right out of the gate, you can see that the default is bcrypt for an encoder decoder, which is not bad, right? That's pretty good starting out right now. But we also support certain older hashing capabilities because those are still in widespread use, sadly, but it's a fact of life. And then, of course, we include things like PBKDF2. I never get that right. I have to like PBKDF2. It just doesn't roll off the tongue, right? Scrypt and what have you. But we also have kind of future-proof this. So if there's an additional mechanism for encryption coming down the road that we want to support, we can incorporate it here. And simply with a user being logging in, we can update and refresh to a newer encryption mechanisms, which is really nice, right? Transparent and future-proof. So I like to show that because I think that's a pretty good thing. So we need to, let's see, back here, there's our encoder. So what I want to do at this point is just take my encoder and do an encode, and we'll encode our passwords here, and we'll try it again, and we'll see what we get. Dot encode, oops. And now we should be a little bit better off than we were a moment ago. And actually, while that's coming up, I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of this because all I've talked at this point is authentication. I haven't done anything in terms of authorization. So we've done nothing in terms of determining who gets where. We've set the stage for that with the roles that we defined when we created each of the two accounts, but we've not filtered for that, right? So let's take our HTTP and we'll do an authorized request. And by the way, when you set up this security filter chain, always go from the most specific to the least specific because, again, as soon as it hits that first match, it pops out. So if you say as your catch-all that everybody has access to anything left, but you put that first, everybody will have access to everything, which is generally a bad thing, right? So I'm going to authorize requests. I'm going to use MVC matchers so that we can use Spring expression language to handle some of the matching here. I'm going to, let's see, go to our admin pages, right? So anything admin or sub pages. And then I'm going to verify that this request, this person has the role of user. No, actually for admin, we want them to have the role of admin, right? And we want to then authorize requests. Well, actually any request from here on out, right? So any request authenticated, and that should be good. Actually, though, since we're specifying this and we're overriding that kind of default behavior that Spring Security provides for us, we also want to do an and form login, so we get our login and logout forms. And we also want to do HTTP basic, so if it's non-browser user agent, that's covered as well. So if I'm still going through HTTP, for instance. So I'm going to go ahead and restart that one more time, and we'll quickly show how that all comes together, and then we'll go to the next step. So far, so good, right? I mean, this kind of does make sense when you step through it. So let's go now to our page here. Let me refresh. Marcos, password. Oh, well, actually, did I? Oh, yeah, because I forgot I was doing the everyone thing. Oh, that looks much better. So we've authenticated. Marcos has access. He is authorized to see the everyone page. Now let's go to the admin page. And here is exactly what we expect in this case as well. It just shows that it's forbidden with a status code of 403. We don't want to provide excessive information to potential attackers, right? We just want to say, nope, you can't go here. So let's go back out now, and we'll log out, and we'll see if Laurie has any better luck. So let's see, Laurie has a strong password. Shh, don't tell anyone. Oh, Well, actually, typing counts. So let's see. Strong password. Once again, I did the wrong thing here. So let's see, everyone. Yes, okay, so Laurie's in there. So let's go out and see if she can access the admin page. And of course she can. Laurie's an administrator. Good thing to aspire to for all of us, right? So she's in. So this is a very quick run through of form-based authentication and how Spring Security makes this almost trivially easy to do, right? Not bad. It's a good thing to get started with easily and quickly. So let's log out there. And then let's close this out. And let's go on to the next step, the next part of our adventure. Everyone still with me? Oh, good. Okay, if you need to get coffee, that's fine. I only had a pot and a half before I came here this morning, so I'm feeling a little subdued. But if you need to get up and grab coffee, that's fine. Just bring me one too. Okay? All right, so I'm going to start off by creating an OIDC or an OpenID Connect application or service. And I promised I would explain this, and I hadn't gotten back to it, so let me just stop here. Who here has heard of OAuth 2, or OAuth in general, right? In the bad old days, before OAuth, in the vast and distant past, we had a kind of a very bad mixture of ways that companies, organizations, individual developers would try to grant access and obtain access on your behalf to your resources. So I like to use the example that actually our friends at Okta use, and it's Yelp. Anyone use the Yelp application? It's one of my favorites. Anytime you go to a new city or even just a different part of your city, you can check out what restaurants are nearby and other stuff too, but I always just go for the food, obviously. So Yelp lets you kind of scope out the food places, the eating places around, and then you can post, like, I checked in here. And it's sort of like Foursquare and what have you. But I checked in here. Your friends can see that. They can say, hey, look, Mark found a new taco place. So this is good, and he rated it really well. Let's check that out. And nobody follows me anyway. It's fine. But Yelp offers that capability. And they have since before the days of OAuth. They used to do this really terrible thing. And it wasn't their fault. It was just the state of the industry as it was. There wasn't a clean and easy way to delegate authorization cleanly, right? So what they would do is they would say, Marcos, you want to use Yelp, right? What's your email provider? Is it Yahoo, Gmail, AOL? Okay, so Gmail it is. So what's your Gmail? Don't tell me. But what's your Gmail account number? I'll use your account. Mine's mark.heckler@gmail.com. Hey, that's great. What's your password? Because next we're going to just harvest your contacts so we can establish those contacts on your behalf. Then we'll get rid of it. We'll log out and we'll get rid of your password, wink, and then we're fine. And that sounds truly terrible because it is truly terrible. But when there's no standard way of doing it, you kind of work with what you have, right? So Yelp did this, as many other companies did as well. This, after a point, you might say, well, everyone should see this as how bad it is and come up with something. So they did, OAuth 1. OAuth 1 was, well, truly terrible as well. So OAuth 2 quickly followed, right? And OAuth 2 came in with the promise of establishing a clean and easy way to delegate authorization, right? So your authorizations, what this application has access to on your behalf. The problem was it really didn't cover that whole authentication side. So there were all kinds of bolt-ons and changes and extra capabilities added that weren't really standard. Eventually, some folks came together, some organizations came together and created OpenID Connect, which handles the authentication side of that. It's kind of a shim on top of OAuth 2, so that OAuth 2 can handle the authorization. OpenID Connect for authentication, OAuth 2 for authorization. So that's why I kind of draw the distinction. You see them used together, but they are in effect distinct. So I'm going to create a login service, and we're going to use OpenID Connect to log in to what we need to and grant, or so that we can in turn then grant authorization to see certain things. So I already have my web dependency and my security dependency. I'm also going to bring in my reactive web dependency, and that's because that gets me the reactive web client. We're not going to delve into the reactive world, but web client handles both reactive and non-reactive interactions with different services. So it's kind of the way forward, so I want to bring that in. And I'm going to generate that project. And then once again, we'll go out and we'll unzip that. And we'll open that as well. And while that comes up, I forgot one thing that I wanted to show. And I think is super cool. The suspense builds. Okay, so all right, so let me close that out and go to presentation mode again. What? Come on, IntelliJ. There we go. Nope. There we go. So wrong way. IntelliJ, you're killing me. Okay, like I said, IntelliJ works a treat until you have multiple projects open in presentation mode, and then it just kind of throws a little bit of a fit. Well, I have a request in for this, an issue. Sadly, it's not gone very far yet. So, and that's pretty much as much my fault as anything. So we're going to create our login service here, and let's see. The first thing I want to do is go to my POM. I do actually need to bring in a few other dependencies that aren't brought in by default from the Spring initializer. So I'm going to bring in my OpenID Connect dependencies here. And that just gets me a few extra dependencies like Spring Security Config, which gives me the ability to do my security configuration via Java config and make this application an OAuth 2 client. OAuth 2 Jose, which is the JavaScript object signing and encryption library. And then Okta. I wanted to bring in the Okta starter because it's one of the things I'm going to use for OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my application.properties file, which is where you put your kind of sensible defaults, your startup defaults for your application. I'm actually going to change this from a properties-based key value to a YAML file so I can structure this a little more nicely. That's my preference. And then I'm going to bring in my configuration there. Now, these are some basic configuration settings. I've got my client ID and secret for Google and Okta. Google and Facebook are handled out of the box with Spring Security. Facebook's not my cup of tea. I don't recommend you use it just because that's me. But support is there, and it's an excellent way of authenticating as well. And of course, Okta provides some great tie-ins as well. And the issuer URI is again, for issuing your bearer tokens. So here, in case anybody's concerned about the client secret, as long as you create an application that routes back to localhost 8080, go crazy. Anyway, okay, so let's go to our main application class, and then let's again start off with creating our endpoint, REST controller class. So this will be our OIDC controller, and we're going to keep this pretty simple as well. So let's see. Get mapping / string hello, return hello. So we'll do hello Spring IO. Yeah, typing is a thing. Spring IO. Yes, we're excited. Okay, so let's just start off with this really quickly so we can see what happens. Even at this very basic level, we've done a bit of, well, on our behalf largely, but a bit of configuration with our dependencies and then our settings that we created in our application.yaml. So now, if we go to localhost 8080, we can see that we have a couple options because, again, we've specified two OpenID Connect providers here, OAuth 2 providers. So we've got Okta here at the top, and we've got Google. Now I'm going to log in with both just to kind of show you a couple neat things, I think. So if we log in with Google, it's asking, hey, what is your account? So Mark.Heckler, and then it's asking my password, of course. So let's see. Oops, let's see there. Oh, perfect. So here we have that kind of super level of security, right? It's prompting us because I have two-factor authentication established and configured on my Google ID, which if you have a corporate arrangement with Google for your Gmail and Google Suite, you may have this already. You may have had this be a requirement for you. So I'm going to plug in my YubiKey and just touch that. And just touch that. There we go. Okay, so we're all set. So now we've gotten two-factor authentication effectively for free, right? Because that's part of our arrangement here, part of our configuration. So we're in. So that's kind of nice. I'm also going to just log out here and go back and try it again through Okta. Now, Okta, I don't have 2FA configured, but we just do this and sign in. And you can see it works pretty much the same way, right? So hello, Spring.io. Nice. Okay, but it really doesn't get us anything because at this point, all we've done is authenticate. Typically what happens, you'll have resource servers which will provide resources, right, that you want to access via your login, via your credentials. So we want to go ahead at this point and create a resource server so we can access that. Res SVR. I don't need my web client. I'll be using that to get to our resource server here momentarily. So let's go ahead and save that and go here. Come on. Oh, there we go. Open. And we'll do that as well. Okay, so the first thing, once again, I'm going to do is go to my POM, and I'm going to add in the few dependencies that I need to add just to give me what I want here for my resource server dependencies. And again, very similar, Spring Security Config for Java Config. This time we've got the library for OAuth 2 resource server, so we can provide that bit of capabilities out of the gate. OAuth 2 Jose once again, and Okta once again. So let's see, we'll do that. We'll go to our application.properties. And again, I'm going to rename this again just as a convenience, YAML, and then we'll bring in our configuration properties there as well. So yeah, so let's go. We're 5 minutes, tons of time. I'm kidding, this is gonna be a bit of a stretch, but we can do it, right? We have the wind at our backs. Okay, so I'm going to create a REST controller. I'm going to set up a default mapping here of resources, class, resource controller, and let's see, get mapping slash something. We'll say that's something. And string get something, return this is something. Right, so this is our resource. We're just going to use that as an example, but that's not it, right? We want something a bit more impressive than that. So in this case, what I actually want to do is be able to check out our claims so we can see what our claims are here. So I'm going to return a string get claims, and I'm going to actually bring in our authentication principal, which is a JOT, a JSON Web Token, right? And this is the way that instead of actually having to pass our authorization, our credentials back and forth among various services. Once we've established that connection, we've established that we are who we say we are, we can use that to provide a JSON Web Token, JOT. Don't ask me on the pronunciation, I didn't make it up. But we're gonna pass that JOT and allow our resource server to use that to see what claims we have, what scopes we have. So there we go, JOT. And we'll just do a return JOT.get claims. String, and that's sufficient again for our purposes. And then we'll do a get mapping. It would be nice to see who is the subject, who is the email address, what email address is associated with this particular authenticated user. So we'll do that. String get subject, return jot dot. Oh, haha. Actually helps if you inject that authentication principal. And that way we can do a get subject. Perfect. Okay. So now, oh, what's that? Line. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, email. We'll change that. That'll work a little better, right? Thank you very much. When I start hearing things, I hear occasionally stuff from behind this wall, and I was trying to figure out where that was coming from. So, okay, so that works, or should work, a little bit better, right? So now I need to, let's go ahead and restart that. And what I want to do at this point is go back to my OpenID controller, because what we need to do now is create a web client bean, web client, I can't even type now, it's just all gone downhill. So the thing I need to do in order to be able to pass that JOT so that we can access that via our resource server is to create a filter here. So in this case, we want a servlet OAuth 2 authorized client exchange filter function. Just rolls off the tongue, right? So it's so easy. We'll shorten that a bit to just filter function. And we will use that to, we'll do a servlet OAuth 2 authorized exchange client exchange filter function. So new, and that actually can take a couple of parameters, a client registration repository and an OAuth 2 authorized client repository. Now one actually maintains some basic registration information for your potential clients that you're going to use. The other is your OAuth 2 authorized client. So actually, I'm going to, again, use Spring Boot's autoconfig, which actually has these beans created on your behalf based upon your dependencies once again, and I'm going to pass those in. So let's see, we need a, now I'm sitting here monologuing and I forgot. So client registration repository, so client registration repository, and we'll just call this client repo. Actually, I'll just call this a registration repo for short. And then an OAuth 2 authorized client repository, and we'll just call that our client repo. And that's sufficient. And then we'll go down and in our servlet, in our filter function, we'll just pass those in. And let's see, client repo. And that's sufficient there to create our servlet, our filter function. Let's just leave it at that. So I'm going to take that filter function and set the default OAuth 2 authorized client to true. What that does is say, hey, look, for our logged in user, that's actually what we're wanting to use for our authorized client. In many cases, that's the case, but it is something that you can opt out of. But again, it kind of makes sense that whoever's logged in, you want access to their resources. So in this case, we'll set that to true. And then we will return a new, actually we'll do a web client.builder. And then we'll assign a base URL. In this case, we're going to be accessing our resource server, which is at localhost 8081/resources for our base URL. Resources. Yeah, that's good. And then I'm going to apply our filter function dot OAuth 2 configuration, which provides that OAuth 2 authentication or capability via our web client. And then we'll build that. And then let's inject our web client here. So private final web client, and then let's create some endpoints so we can access our resource server, and then we're off to the races, right? Okay, so get mapping slash something, string get something, return client dot get dot, and we have our base URI, which is enough for what we need right here. We're going to bring this back, the body of our response, as a mono, which is a 0 or 1 publisher, reactive publisher. And we're bringing back a string, right? In this case, oops, string class. And then we're just going to convert that to the basic string, right? Because this is imperative code at this point. It's easy to go from non-blocking to blocking, not so much the other way around. And then I'm going to do a get mapping slash claims. So we can retrieve our claims, string get claims. Return client.get. We need to add on our URI of /claims. Retrieve. Body to mono. Once again, we're returning a string, and we'll just block to grab the actual string out of the mono. Once again, get mapping slash email string get email return client.get URI email retrieve body to mono. Once again, we're just returning a string in this case, and block. Now, one thing that I forgot to do, so I'm going to go back over and do that while that's restarting, is on our resource server, say that 3 times fast, I need to create a bit of customized configuration for our security adapter once again. So enable web security, class, security config, extends, web security configure adapter. Once again, we're going to override our configure. There we go. And actually here, we can just start right in here, http dot authorize requests. We want to use MVC matchers once again for our claims. Has authority, in this case, for OAuth. And we need to have our scope OpenID, in this case, so we can access what we need there. And authorize requests, MVC matchers, once again. In this case, for email, has authority. We're just going to go with a scope email, right? And dot Let's see, OAuth 2 resource server, JOT. So we can have JOT support here as well. So let's go ahead and run that. And now let's go for the big finale. And, ooh, we're over. So I need to wrap this up quickly so we can go eat, right? Yeah, so, all right. So let's go back up here and, oh, yes, I blew that up nicely. Makes it a little hard to read there. We'll just go in via Okta. Let's see, I need to log out first here. So /log out, yes. And then let's log in with Okta once again. Okay, let's do this the hard way. Localhost 8080. There we go. Mark. Sweet. All right. So hello, Spring.io. Now if we want to go to something just to see if we're passing through to our resource server. Oh, okay. So what am I doing? What have I got here? Oh, resources something. Yeah, that's just, well, that's fine. Let's just do that. So resources. Actually, no, I can't do that because I mapped it wrong. We'll just cut right to the chase here. Claims. I can go back and restart this, but this is much cleaner, and just this is the part I wanted to show you anyway. So here we're getting our claims off of our resource server. So we're, well, via our resource server. So we're seeing what claims we've extended to that. We can see that we have scopes of email, address, phone, OpenID, and profile. We can see the subject is me, Mark, at thehecklers.org. Now if I go and just check the email, we can see that that pulls that back fine. So everything is working. We've connected via OpenID. We've established our identity, our authentication there. We've then authorized certain endpoints based upon certain capabilities provided or expressed in our JOT. So let's go back and wrap up, and let's go eat. So everything you saw here and a bit more is in this top repository here, Spring Security for Noobs. Please join in, please check it out. If you see anything that I've missed, or hey, would you do this, or why didn't you do this, please let me know. Happy to take feedback. Again, there's only so much I can cram in, so I try to kind of hit the high points. But if there's something important you feel I glossed over, let me know, because I want to continue to iterate and improve on this. The Spring Security main site is right there at the bottom, Spring.io project, Spring Security. Great set of resources there as well. Thanks for coming, and let's go enjoy Spring.io.